Hello, good morning. Apologies that we're starting a little bit late here. Working from home seems to be fantastic unless you actually need to rely on technology and then everything falls apart. But it's fantastic to be here this morning, and I just want to say thank you to all of the organisers for inviting me to speak. I've been really excited about this conversation actually, because it feels as though it's really the right moment to be talking about how we communicate with our audiences. Even before the pandemic that is impacting us all, it really felt as though we were in an era of trust. The word has never been more relevant than it is today, and we've seen that evolve over the last few years. Even before COVID, before Black Lives Matter, there were scandals surrounding social media, there were questionable global politics going on, and this had become an issue that we were thinking about all of the time. What we can trust and rely on is something that's been at the forefront of everyone's mind for many years now. As technology has become increasingly prominent in our everyday lives, our privacy and data has been constantly surrounded by questions of trust and security. With every device that we add to our homes, every website that we log into, every video conference or virtual event, just like this morning, that we choose to attend, we are making a decision about who has information and knowledge about us, and we're deciding how comfortable we feel with that. And it's for those reasons that now, more than ever, brands must strive to create and maintain trust in their consumers' minds. Now at CNN, we really know this better than anyone because trust has always been something that we think about every day. We've spent the last 40 years building our brand on the foundation of trust. It is the currency that we trade in. And our brand is really only ever as strong as the trust that exists between us and our audience. That audience turns to us for facts and reliable storytelling. And it's true that you could probably say this of most news brands, but for CNN as a global news publisher, speaking to audiences in every corner of the globe, it's particularly relevant. For so many of our viewers, we are their eyes and ears on parts of the world that they will probably never see for themselves. And for that reason, we need to ensure that we are never misleading them. If we fail to keep pace with that vision and mission, we will lose the trust of our viewers. And in turn, we'll lose the trust of the brands and the individuals who turn to us for exactly this reason. Now, when I talk about brands, I am speaking in terms of advertising partners, and we will get to that later. But I also mean the way that brands leverage the trust that audiences have in our journalism. If you turn on CNN at any given time, you're likely to see interviews with world leaders, with executives, with CEOs. When Mark Zuckerberg needed to apologize for the breach of trust between Facebook and its global community, he did so on CNN in a worldwide interview. He trusted only one media outlet to tell his story and to be his voice. He understood that it's our trusted platform that would be key to the success of his communications. And I think it's fair to say that over the past 8 months, we've all started to think about trust even more. We've started to look at it and understand it in an entirely different way, in a way that makes it feel truly critical. The way that we make decisions on a day-to-day basis is now entirely reliant on how much we trust the information that's being presented to us, how much we trust the science about coronavirus, the messaging about socializing, the information about vaccines. We probably all feel slightly better this week having heard the news of successful vaccines coming from the likes of Pfizer. But we have to trust that information in order to feel that positivity. We've seen a continued rise in the worries that people have about fake news and misinformation for exactly this reason. We are no longer as willing to accept advice that's being shared virally on Facebook or WhatsApp, or to assume that every source of information is equal in terms of truth and transparency. When Edelman's Trust Barometer came out in April, and I'm sure that some of the people watching today will already have seen that, it really showed an overwhelming awareness that people were concerned about the spread of fake news. 74% of people, in fact, said that they were concerned about false information. And 45%, worryingly, said that they'd found it difficult to get news that they actually did think was credible. We also saw a staggering 85% of people saying that they wanted to hear from scientists rather than politicians, which is a real shift away from the kind of social tribalism that we've seen so much developing in the Western world over the last few years, much more towards unquestionable fact. And these trends towards the need for news and certainty have been evident not just in what we will believe, but in the consumption patterns and behaviours that we're using to find that information. More than ever, as you can see on the screen, people are turning to major news organisations to stay up to date with information that they can rely on. In that same global survey, 64% of respondents said that they considered major news organisations to be the most reliable source of information in this period. They consider it more reliable than government sources, than global health organisations, and than their own national health organisations. And we've seen changes in the way that people are finding those news organisations. We've seen a surge over the last 8 months of audiences returning to more traditional media channels such as TV. What we can assume from all of this information is that when our trust is questioned, we return to what we know. And now, interestingly, in this moment in which we're all examining trust and all thinking about what can be trusted and known, it's not just news organisations and scientists that people have been expecting to hear from. We ran a survey with GWI earlier this year that showed that 83% of our audience approve of brands running campaigns that show how they are responding to coronavirus, how they are helping and connecting with their customers. And this is really at odds with a lot of the conversations that were happening with brands and in media agencies at the beginning of this year, where brands were supposing that people wouldn't want to hear from them, that they should turn off their advertising during this time. When so many of those businesses did decide to switch off their marketing for months on end and go quiet out of what I'm sure felt like respect, their consumers were actually waiting and expecting to hear from them. There's been an expectation of collective responsibility in this moment. People want to hear from brands. They want to know that those companies that they are giving their money to and handing over their data to understand this moment. They want to know how those companies are responding to the coronavirus and helping consumers like themselves. Ultimately, beyond just wanting practical information, viewers want to know that brands and businesses are noticing and responding to the changes that we're all experiencing. Just sitting here today, talking to you through a screen in my own home, rather than on a stage in Paris, really speaks to how different the world looks today, how different our experiences of it are. We want to know that the businesses that we consume are also experiencing those differences, because ultimately we can only trust a brand if we feel that they understand us. Now, of course, it's all well and good to say we should keep advertising, but we know that there are right ways and there are wrong ways for brands to make their voice heard in this moment. It is a sensitive time, and we need to think clearly about what that communication looks like. It's a time to be mindful of the world around us and to adjust our communications accordingly. To be able to create and retain trust in this moment, we often suggest to brands that they should follow a few key principles. Firstly, we should be authentic and keep it simple. There's no point trying to overcomplicate an already difficult situation. This is a moment of complexity, and ultimately, your consumers just want to know at the moment what your brand values really are. Brands should be present and invest in their consumer relationships. Exactly as the data has shown, keeping the lights on during this period is crucial. If your marketing suddenly disappears for 6 months during a moment of crisis, you are not offering stability, and you're certainly not going to develop any relationships in that time. Be human and show empathy. Focusing on that idea of relationships and how we develop them, we need to be conscious of the fact that now more than ever is a time for compassion and connection. This is not an era when faceless corporations will rise. It's the time when we seek out businesses that have a human side. And I've really felt that personally in the number of companies that now deliver to my door, companies that are local and independent that I've chosen to support during this moment. We are looking for that human side of business. And finally, be a source of truth and positive impact. And this is where it all comes back to that idea of trust. Brands, just like politicians and media outlets, need to be truthful and reliable to build long-term trust in this moment of vulnerability. And for those companies that have been following this guidance, the benefits have been incredibly clear. At C&M, we made a decision very early on in the year to start tracking the brands that had stayed present during the pandemic. We wanted to use that data and compare it to average campaign performance results from previous years, looking at the same types of brands, the same types of audiences in the same periods, and understanding what those differences look like. And as you can see from the data in front of you, those brands saw marked improvements in almost all metrics. There was a 12% increase in ad recall, an 8% increase in brand consideration, and an incredible 13% rise in brand perception. So if you're really trying to think of one message to take away from this, at this moment in the presentation, I would say in times of crisis, invest in your consumer relationships and you will see the rewards. Of course, continuing to be present and getting your message right is really only half of the battle. To be truly effective, brands must ensure that they are communicating with their customers in the right environments. Just as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, companies and PR firms will often turn to journalists like ours in specific moments of crisis. The trust that we have built can be leveraged and borrowed from. They want the credibility that being associated with a brand like C&M will offer them. In much the same way, when marketers decide on what their media plans will look like, they should be thinking about which publishers and which environments will best imbue their messaging with trust. What we've seen develop in digital over the last few years is a battle between suitability and scale. I'm sure this will be familiar to lots of you. So often marketers feel as though they can only have one or the other. They can reach huge numbers of people by buying media in cheap but potentially unsafe environments, or they can prioritize brand safety and block massive swathes of digital inventory, limiting their reach in order to ensure that they don't run against anything controversial. What we need to start understanding as an industry is that there is a middle ground. And the first step towards finding this middle ground is to recognize the difference between brand safety and brand suitability. These terms are so often used interchangeably, but in reality, they are quite distinct. Whether an environment is brand safe or unsafe should really be a question of what it's damaging, rather than whether it's right or wrong for the message that's appearing against it. And I'm very familiar with this conversation because news sites are often charged with being unsafe. By the very nature of what we do every day, we publish content about plane crashes, about terrorist attacks. It would be irresponsible of us if we didn't. However, when we publish this content, it is heavily researched, it is fact-checked, and it is reliable. In that sense, it is a safe environment, but those specific articles obviously might not be the right environment for every brand. So instead of assuming that whole environments are safe or unsafe, we need to start considering a shift towards brand suitability, which considers the meaning, the context, and the potential implications of online content specific to an actual brand's needs. Brand suitability is about much more than just avoiding ad placements alongside inappropriate content. It seeks to identify the spaces that work for your message and your objectives. What is suitable for an alcohol brand is likely to be unsuitable for a toy brand. We need to understand the differences and the nuances to ensure that we're connecting with an advertiser's key target audience. And I mention nuance specifically because our most commonly used brand safety tool as an industry really does not understand it. I'm sure you've all heard of keyword block lists. It's a very common tool employed by marketers to try and ensure that they are only appearing in brand safe environments. Those marketers or their blocklist partners will come up with a huge list of words that might be related to negative subject matter, and then will use that list of words to prevent their ads from appearing against any pages that contain them. The lists are regularly added to, but rarely altered to remove old keywords, and crucially, they don't take into account at all how that word is being used. A relevant example of this that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the word coronavirus. By the end of March this year, which was really when most of us was first starting to be aware of coronavirus and feeling its impact, Integral Ad Science had reported that they'd already blocked the word coronavirus 35 million times in the UK alone. Now, I guarantee that for most publishers who blocked the word then, they will still be blocking the word now. Yet last week, when Pfizer announced their vaccine results, and again on Monday, be exactly the place you'd want to be in. To overcome this issue, at CNN, we have developed a new system. We know that brand suitability tools need to keep pace with rapid reporting and breaking news, and brands need to factor in context, so that the words that they're thinking about are recognized as having multiple meanings. We want to analyze those words for their true connotation and not just block them because they aren't really being understood. Our system, which we refer to as SAM, can analyze, decipher, and interpret word combinations. It can recognize tone and syntax. And through this process, it can accurately classify all of our videos, our articles, and our galleries at the moment of publication. We have a very granular tagging system that works in real time to assign a contextual tag to each and every piece of content that we produce. And then we use a neuro-linguistic AI technology to analyze that content and determine whether it is positive, negative, or somewhere in between. So based on the needs of our advertisers, we'll be able to tailor a bespoke targeting solution for them and take their individual brand needs into account. And through this, we are able to find that middle ground and deliver both scale and suitability. Going back to that earlier conversation about words that are blocked, so often the one that is used as an example is shoot. People block this because they don't want to sit around content to do with gun violence, which is completely understandable. Few brands would see that as safe. But as you can see from the slide on your screen, the word shoot has many other meanings. It can be used in many other contexts. The article that we published here is about a 5-year-old who staged a photo shoot of her grandparents, dressing them up as characters from a Disney Pixar film. For a brand like Kodak, this actually might be the ideal positioning for their ad. Our tool is able to recognize the word Sam as being in the context of a positive story about grandparents, photography, and family relationships. And when we measure this technology against previous keyword block listing technologies, the results have been really outstanding. For one of our partners, we did exactly that, comparing SAM to the block listing technology that they had used previously. The block list had blocked 3,000 keywords, which had started to create a real problem for them. As you can imagine, not only were they blocking articles that could have been perfect for the brand, but to hit their delivery goals, they were being forced to run in environments that were technically safe, but also entirely irrelevant. By using context and sentiment instead, we were able to remove these constraints and increase that scale by 37%, reducing the number of reported incidents by a staggering 93%, clearly showing that the volume of content that was being overlooked as a result of the confusion was reducing the amount of scale and reducing the amount of suitability. Now, I really wanted to finish on a positive note by showcasing how this deeper understanding of suitability actually allows brands to not only change the way they think about the environments that they should not run in, but to find the environments that they should. Last year, we worked with Ralph Lauren to produce a really powerful campaign using our tool. Their brand is an advocate and has been for a long time of LGBTQ communities and is a sponsor of Gay Pride. To make this campaign effective, it was so important to ensure that their brand was against positive content relating to these subjects. So we used SAM to first find articles and videos that were tagged as relating to Gay Pride and LGBTQ discussions, and then to separate out the ones that were positive. By doing this, we were able to allow Ralph Lauren to show their support for these positive stories, and in doing so, to offer further support and space for these important messages to be heard. In a second iteration of this campaign, we used exactly the same approach to target positive stories about cancer. Now, you can imagine that cancer is a word that so often appears on keyword block lists. But actually, this new way of working enables us to find and crucially to fund the inspirational stories that so many people out there really need to hear. Hopefully, all of this has been helpful in considering how to really make your brand's voice stand out and reach the right audiences in a time of crisis. And as we think about this in the context of the strange and often challenging year that we're having for advertising, I would love for you to remember these 3 key takeaways. Be a source of truth. Create relationships with your consumers that are built on trust and credibility. Continue to invest in those relationships. In times of crisis, when a brand goes dark, they lose that connection, and through it, they lose their opportunity to show that they understand their audience. And finally, remember that context and sentiment are a partnership. One should not exist without the other. And when we separate them, we really lose the opportunity to find the right space for our messaging. Thank you very much for listening to me.